Got an interesting question by email from a viewer who was asking my advice about his own changes in career and education. And the questions are to some extent pragmatic, but to some extent also they are philosophical. So I'm going to leave out the personal details of this guy. His name is Christopher. Hi, Chris. And toward the end of his message, he reflects that in considering these different disciplines of study, these different career paths in front of him, quote, I had it in my mind that I should achieve something to try to help people, but I feel like this may be more motivated by conceit, by the desire to feel like I'm influential and important and that I matter, rather than by real goodwill towards other beings and by real goodness. So, close quote. Very interesting set of considerations. Generally, I want to say with absolutely no cynicism that when I talk to other vegans, the question of how you're going to earn a living in this world, the question of how you're going to earn money, is really interesting to me. I think it's a really interesting topic of conversation. When I was writing email recently to another vegan who I know on YouTube, I had a sort of disclaimer saying, look, I know everyone asks you, what do you do for a living? It's some old chat. It's a banal topic of conversation because it's so common. But I'm asking this really not in a banal way. I'm really interested. And I think there are really interesting ethical questions surrounding employment, surrounding career paths for vegans that other people don't think about or maybe aren't as sensitive to. I am a vegan, but before I became vegan, I had already quit jobs over a point of moral principle. Because that's the kind of guy I was. I was also strictly vegetarian. I'm saying before I was vegan, but I already refused to wear leather, among other things. So I was pretty close to vegan back then. But in general, I mean, it's hard to generalize about vegans. We're a diverse bunch of people with very different issues and values. But certainly the core ethical concerns of veganism lend themselves to some philosophizing about how a person is going to make money. And in this case also, what does it mean to try to help people? What is humanitarian engagement or motivation? And in this case, how is that different from this kind of conceit? Now, I'm an overt nihilist. I may be a highly ethical nihilist, but my own values I describe as historical nihilism. What I think is valuable in this world and what can make a positive difference is not based on belief, but on very pragmatic, down-to-earth concerns. And that guided my engagement with ecology, with politics, now with veganism, and so on also. He asks here, without quoting him directly, how does this kind of conceit differ from really caring about helping people? I think one of the first things you have to realize, the philosopher Max Stirner wrote about this at length, but unfortunately you have to read Stirner in German because the English translation is terrible. One of the challenges in life is moving past the sort of popular delusion of talking about the people. In German, it's das Volk. And to really think about people, not in the abstract, but in the concrete. So this question of motivation, if we're talking about Laos, talking about doing humanitarian work in Laos, I can tell you how I feel about Lao culture, about Lao people in general, about particular Lao people I've known, about the Lao language, and then about ethnic minorities within Laos, because a lot of the humanitarian work is to help smaller ethnic groups that are even more poverty-stricken, even more disadvantaged than regular Lao people within that country. And I can reflect on the extent to which my humanitarian engagement, we're talking about the future here, not the past, may or may not reflect real feelings of goodwill toward the Lao people. Now, why is that? Look, I drink zero alcohol. Laos has one of the hardest drinking cultures in the world. This is just one example of how I'm dramatically different from Lao culture. I've lived in Scotland and I've lived in Laos. They drink more whiskey in Laos. It's my honest opinion. It is a hard drinking culture, and they drink Scottish whiskey too, actually. If you go to a Lao wedding, one of the most common gifts is bottles of Scotch whiskey. There are many, many obvious ways in which my values are incompatible with Lao culture and just with the reality of daily life in Laos. Getting a good night's sleep is very important to me, despite the fact that I look incredibly exhausted now. I'm jet lagged. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. I have all kinds of complaints with that. In Laos, you're in a country where you're surrounded by barking dogs and roosters crowing at all hours, animal husbandry of different kinds, getting a decent night's sleep is incredibly tough. Anywhere in the country, unless you live in a solid concrete box with no windows. And even then, barking dogs can get through concrete. There are many ways in which I might be able to say I have contempt for Laos or I dislike Lao culture, and does this contradict the humanitarian impulse? Well, for me, I see the Lao people, in the past tense I saw the Lao people, as in many ways victims of circumstances that other countries created for them, an incredibly violent history. They're on the list of countries that have had the most bombs dropped on them of any country in the world. Definitely, the United States dropped more bombs on Laos than ever were dropped on Germany during World War II. An enormous tonnage of bombardment dropped on the country. Terrible suffering for reasons beyond their control, and they're struggling with backwardness, just lack of access to education, lack of literacy, all kinds of things that make me feel that I'm in a position to help them, and also make me feel that many of the problems with that culture are not their own fault. Now, maybe that is a kind of humanitarian delusion. I used the word feel a whole bunch of times there. I didn't use the word know. To feel something is very different from to know something. And I met people in Laos and even more in Cambodia who had first gone to those countries with this type of humanitarian impulse. They learned the language, they stayed there for a few years, and they started off feeling, these people need my help, these people deserve my help, because their problems are not of their own creation and they need assistance. And after some number of years, they turn a corner in terms of their own cynicism, and they feel like, fuck these people, they're the creators of their own problems, I hate these people, it's their problem, they created the mess, they should get themselves out of it. And they may still be employed 6 days a week in humanitarian work. And as Chris is asking here, and they may not be motivated by real goodwill towards these people. They may have lost their goodwill. The goodwill they had before may have evaporated in the face of various facts, in the face of how they feel about the culture. I mean, definitely Cambodia, the rough and tumble of that culture. I met many people. I may be an example myself. By the end of my time in Cambodia, I never wanted to go back to Cambodia. There are many, many things I really dislike about Cambodian culture. And if you're talking about sacrificing your own time, effort, and money to help people, again, the crucial thing is to think about who are the people, not as an abstraction, but to think about real people. If you did humanitarian work, helping drug addicts here in Canada, do you have it in you to care about them, to respect them, to really help them? You need to be engaged with the all too human reality of who these people are, whether they're alcoholics or drug addicts or just ignorant farmers. I mean, God, in Laos, I mean, you had problems with people literally drinking paint thinner because they felt it made certain types of juice taste better. Total ignorance. You had problems in Cambodia with people poisoning themselves and others using pesticides improperly. But the labels on the pesticides would only be written in English and Chinese. They can't read them. Whether or not they're actually literate in any language, literate in Cambodian or anything else anyway, is another question. Ignorance itself, ignorance is destructive and dangerous and ugly. And can you still have goodwill towards people? People who may put you in harm's way. People who may put your life in danger and may, destroy things you care about out of their ignorance. I almost feel like I can say humanitarian work or humanitarian path in life, if it's based on goodwill towards people, may be doomed to failure. Most of this discourse, in the last 100 years, it's been dominated by Christianity. Most of the charities that helped drug addicts, helped the homeless, or what have you, were Christian charities. And most of these conversations and philosophical reflections took place within a totally Christian idiom of trying to love and care for the poor and these things. And, this is instead, obviously in this generation, more and more people are asking these questions in a secular way. In my case, in a totally atheistic, nihilistic way. And although as bad as Christianity is, I dislike many things about Christianity, obviously it created a cultural framework that massively simplified these questions when people engaged in them. The same way that nationalism simplified questions by just saying your motivation is to do this for king and country. Religion often has the effect of massively simplifying what you're doing and why you're doing it by simply saying it's for God. It's not even for the greater good. It's not even to benefit particular people. Now, the other problem is here, so the first big issue I raised was how we think of the people. And then this question of real goodness, of real goodwill towards people, we need to reevaluate in terms of how you actually feel about actual people or actual groups of people. His other concern is of whether or not his engagement, it's not really clear to me exactly what type of work he's thinking about doing, whether it's pure charity work, work involving languages, but his ideas of helping humanity one way or another, through one discipline or career or another, he's concerned that is really motivated by conceit, by a desire to feel important. I am very critical of various flaws in my character, but that is not one of them. And I've got to say, I had a lot of experience discussing these issues with my girlfriends in life, girlfriends who have come and gone, because I think some of them couldn't really understand what motivated me. I remember one girlfriend I had, she was also Canadian. She felt that the reason for this was that people had always treated me as important anyway. That was her interpretation of my character, that just kind of when I walk into a room, people would listen to me, people would treat me with a certain kind of respect just because of my self-confidence and manner of speaking. That was her interpretation. And I understand her reasons for thinking that. She had her experience with me being my girlfriend and whatever. Obviously, she's a biased observer of who I am, what my life is like. But I can remember long periods of my life where I was not treated with respect and how I felt about it, and where people regarded me as a person of no account and no significance in different contexts and so on. And I've got to say, for me, that was never the motivating factor. I was really interested in poverty as poverty. We have this saying in English about, art for art's sake. I was really interested in poverty for the sake of poverty. When I first enrolled in university, as a much younger and more naive man, the subject I enrolled in was actually economics. So year one, week one of my first BA diploma, I thought I would study economics because I wanted to study the philosophy of poverty. I wanted to be engaged with poverty and how we cope with poverty. Not just charities, government policy, everything else. And I was disappointed. It was a crushing disappointment to me that I was in a department that was only about making money. It was only about getting rich. And all the students were there for that reason. And what was being taught, God, at that time, day trading was a big deal. People making money through day trading, managing hedge funds. These were the aspirations of the students, and these were the things the program was supposed to train you, these types of careers. There was absolutely nothing about poverty. It was my idea of economics, not my idea of what economics is, but why I cared about economics. That was not going to be covered in that university program at all. And in many ways, for the next 4 years, that was a disappointment I never recovered from. I went from one department to another and one discipline to another, looking for what I couldn't find in a department of economics. And I ended up at the very, very end studying Buddhism. And in a lot of ways, you can say that when I was studying Buddhism, I was trying to get back to my reasons for being in university in the first place. Because what excited me so much about Buddhism was exactly, and this was Theravada Buddhism, was wow, Sri Lanka was then in civil war, it's now post-war. Cambodia, long civil war, then just recently post-war. All of these were countries emerging from post-war extreme poverty. And being engaged with Buddhism and the languages of Southeast Asia gave me a way to meaningfully connect to these cultures and contexts and so on in that period of history. So I wanted to have the experience in Laos that I did have of living in a hut made out of bamboo on the side of the Mekong River and waking up in the morning and chopping firewood. And then you light the firewood on fire and you have to boil the drinking water you're going to drink. And I would eat white rice and yellow lentils and vitamin pill. And being engaged with the reality of agriculture and poverty and that kind of hands-on suffering. I don't know what to say. An interest in poverty also guided my engagement with Buddhism in a massive way. And I can't even say in a profound way. It's shallow. I grew up in Toronto, Canada for the most part. I was always interested in poverty within Canada, particularly First Nations poverty. When I came back to Canada, I wanted to be engaged in that. But none of that, for me, subjectively, none of that was me wanting to feel important. Now, if you know anything about what goes on in academic Buddhism, already this made me profoundly alien to pretty much the whole scene. There's a lot of escapism. There are a lot of white people living in luxury in California and making money through meditation retreats who want to keep on living in luxury in California and have absolutely no interest in poverty or the emergence of poverty in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. How do we choose what we study in university? The real answer for me was that I was running away from one lousy department after another. I was trying to take the least terrible option. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And that is still true today. I'm still coping with lousy courses, lousy departments, lousy options, and not at all being able to do what I want to do, neither in terms of immediate research nor in terms of long-term career. So the disappointment I had with the Department of Economics at one university, I've had a much worse disappointment here with the department teaching Chinese, really crushing. And I had to take that complaint to the dean, and there was a whole controversy over the fact that basically the teaching of Chinese at UVic is garbage. And now that's going to have tremendously long-term consequences for me in my life and my career options. I came here to study Chinese, and now I'm not studying Chinese. So the question really of what you can study, sadly, is going to be based on a completely pragmatic evaluation of what's taught in your university, what you can succeed at, and what departments happen to be well organized, happen to have competent professors, and even how those professors feel about you. Because, I have a certain interest in poverty, as already described. But if I go to a department in a university where everyone's a Marxist or a communist, then right away I've got a conflict with them, and they may all despise me. And if you think that's only a hypothetical example, it's not. There were a lot of people in academia who are on the far left, and I have myself had contact with many different departments that were predominantly communist or far left wing. Again, Buddhism was a way to avoid that. Buddhism was a non-socialist, non-communist philosophy that for me was engaged with politics and poverty and all these other things. So that boils to probably absolutely zero practical advice for Christopher here, but a set of reflections in response to his message. He asked also specifically about the study of languages. Maybe I should make separate videos talking about that.